Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back in our episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going through all the posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have from Josh Blackman, my resignation from the Heritage Foundation, from Reason.com, posted by Fear the Creeper, and that they added, Josh Blackman is the former senior editor of the Heritage Guide to the Constitution. And yeah, personally, if this guy wants to resign because he thinks that the Heritage Foundation's become too anti-Semitic, I think that's fine. But, I do think it's a lot interesting how a lot of so-called conservatives become progressives the second Israel or anti-Semitism is brought up. It just goes to show you that, people will justify jumping for whatever hoops they feel like as long as something goes by their narratives. It's like when it comes to like critical theory, one guy I think it was against critical theory was Mark Levin, but yet he said, "Oh, the people need to check people are born anti-Semitic," and that's pretty much the same stuff that critical theory uses. Oh, you're born racist, and it just goes to show you that when the second you bring up anti-Semitism or Israel, well, all these a lot of these so-called conservatives like Josh Blackman suddenly become pretty much indistinguishable from progressives, as I said, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump administration is to start seizing pay of defaulted student loan borrowers in January, from CNBC.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, personally, I think libertarian positions. If you took out a loan from the government, the government's should be able to start seizing your pay if you default. And yeah, that's why I personally made sure to pay off my loans as soon as possible. But ultimately, if you didn't pay off your student loans, maybe you shouldn't have taken out those loans in the first place. Our culture and society pretty much encourages everyone to go to college. Well, I think the better way would be push more people into trade school or just learning on the job. But I think college is pretty much just a leftist circle jerk anyway that I can get for free on pretty much on Reddit or a lot of other social media platforms for that matter. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have excerpt in Storm at the Capitol. Police officers detail a brutal assault on January 6, 2021, from APnews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, if progressives want to keep pushing January 6, I think they should be able to. But that being said, it's very much like the 2020s equivalent of 9/11. Yes, 9/11 was bad, but it was eventually used to fund endless wars in the Middle East and which weren't good, and that's very much why the progressives are using January 6th. It wasn't good, but it's being used to push some very unlibertarian things. If it's pretty much saying the DNC pretty much says January 6th was bad, and vote for the Democrats for the rest of your life and never question anything the party does. And I don't think that's very libertarian. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have my thoughts on Dave Smith, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's a cross post they made to a comment on theirs on the classical liberal subreddit, which is it's since been deleted. But yeah, it was on a video posted from the Biblical Anarchy podcast, by Jacob Winograd, and that video was Liquid Zulu and exposed Dave Smith. But anyway, Ninja Lover said, let's see what they said. And I wouldn't be able to share any more false engagements in the classical liberal subreddit after posting that, unfortunately. Yeah, because, the classical liberal subreddit's been taken over by rightists. And I think as noted, I think their comment got censored. But, this guy's had me censored from this quote-unquote uncensored subreddit for over a year. And he doesn't see any hypocrisy in that whatsoever. It just goes to show you that, people don't like censorship when they're the ones being censored. But, when they censor others, it's entirely justified in their eyes. And that just goes to show you, there's a lot of people who are hypocrites like this guy who's crying about how he's got censored from a subreddit because, it's a rightist circle jerk, but 95% of subreddits are leftist circle jerks with the Libertarian Censored subreddit here, and Reddit people don't care about that. But when it's very much like that, the Joker meme from The Dark Knight, every subreddit's a leftist circle jerk, no one cares. One subreddit gets taken over by the rightists, and everyone loses their minds. Regardless, I'll see what they did share in the comment. Apparently, it's been leaked. Here it is. I'll give Dave Smith this. He was right in debate with Zulu. When your favorite ideology forces you to say you'd let the earth be destroyed rather than steal a single penny, you have left the realm of political philosophy and entered a suicide pact. Dave quickly identified it as absurd, and in that vacuum, he looked like the only adult in the room. But this is exactly how the grift works. Dave uses these moments of common sense as a Trojan horse. He wins trust by rejecting the rigid dogmatism of the fringes, presenting himself as the pragmatic or realist libertarian. Once he has established that we can't be absolutist about everything, he doesn't use that flexibility to advance liberty. He uses it to snuggle excuses for right-wing authoritarianism. Here's how he applies that's nuance. When it comes to the border, suddenly the non-aggression principle vanishes. He adopts the Hoppian stance that public property is taxpayer property, effectively arguing that the state has the right to act like a private landlord. In theory, this sounds like a property rights argument. In reality, it is the intellectual cover for a police state. Because of rhetoric like this, we now have mass federal agents demanding papers on street corners, citizens being detained without due process, and racial profiling becoming standard operating procedure. Dave isn't just arguing for borders, he's rationalizing the existence of a militarized domestic force that operates outside the Constitution, something he would scream about if a Democrat did it. When Ron DeSantis used state power to punish Disney for his political speech, a principled libertarian would call that a violation of the First Amendment property rights. Dave found a loophole. He argued that because Disney benefited from state privilege, copyrights, tax breaks, they were fair game to be crushed. But notice where this logic doesn't apply. Elon Musk and SpaceX receive billions in government contracts and subsidies, arguably far more state privilege than a theme park. Yet does Dave call for the state to crush Musk? No, he cheers for him to run the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. This reveals the grift. He's fine with the state weaponizing his power against private companies as long as the target is woke. If the target is MAGA-aligned crony capitalists, the state privilege argument conveniently disappears. Dave demands absolute purity from anyone on the left. He'll purge a libertarian candidate for supporting open borders or being too liberal, yet he happily breaks bread with Nick Fuentes and the alt-right, calling them fellow travelers. He extends nuance and charity to white nationalists who want a theocratic state, but refuses to extend it to fellow libertarians who disagree on strategy. During the BLM riots, Dave sounded like a standard Republican demanding order and the protection of property, but when Donald Trump faced indictment for trying to overturn an election, Dave pivoted to the system is rigged. He demands the book be thrown at street rioters, but frames the head of the executive branch as a helpless victim. He effectively argues that left-wing criminals should be arrested, but right-wing criminals are political martyrs. And don't let his recent break with Trump fool you. Yes, Dave is now calling for impeachment over the Iran bombings, but this isn't a return to principle. It's just the exit strategy for the grift. He spent years gaslighting libertarians, believing a national strongman was the anti-war option, ignoring decades of evidence to the contrary. Now that the predictable consequences have arrived, he washes his hands of the administration he helped to empower. He doesn't take responsibility for the wreckage. He just pivots to playing the betrayed outsider to keep his audience angry and engaged. He rode the MAGA wave when it was profitable, and now he's jumping off board the crash, leaving the Libertarian Party to pay the bill. So yes, Dave was right that we shouldn't let the world burn for a penny, but let's not pretend he's a philosopher king. He's a rhetorical grifter who uses common sense and small so abstractly while he sells out the entire movement to the right-wing populace on the big stuff. And I guess I would kind of agree with that. Dave Smith can be hypocritical. Everyone can be hypocritical to some extent. As I said earlier, this guy's very hypocritical. He cries about how he got censored from the communist and the classical liberal subreddit, but he's had me banned from his quote unquote uncensored subreddit for over a year. And personally, I think it just goes to show, if people are gonna always act in their own self-interest, and I personally, I probably agree a little more with Dave Smith than I do with this guy who is Ninja Lover fellow. But regardless, I do think the libertarian position is we gotta stop looking at things from the left-right dichotomy, and we gotta start looking at things from a authoritarian, libertarian dichotomy. Dave Smith, Donald Trump might have been the lesser of two evils between him and Kamala, but regardless, it doesn't really matter because, the deep state's going to be running the country regardless. Donald Trump is just a WWE style distraction when it comes to the politics, because, it's pretty much just a soap opera. The president's mostly just a figurehead, and he can distract people pretty much doing whatever bullshit of the week he does, like putting his name on the Candy Center, or saying, oh, well, here are the new Trump-class battleships, or having UFC at the White House. And it just goes to show you that, it's just very much a distraction, that's very much the point of what Donald Trump stirs. He stirs to distract people from, it's a big club and you ain't in it. And Donald Trump's definitely in that big club, I would say. That's why, I've never really supported him. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump ally Laura Loomer says Democrats were right from Newsweek.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, of course, Reddit normally hates Laura Loomer, but Reddit, if any, Reddit will automatically support anyone who says the Democrats are right. Adolf Hitler could come back from the dead and say the Democrats are right, and Reddit would suddenly love the guy. And it just goes to show you that Reddit has no values other than being pretty much DNC anti-Trump propaganda. I don't really like Trump. I never voted for him. But Reddit always has to spin everything to be anti-Trump, pro-Democrat, and that's very much how you have to always remember its biases when it comes to that. I'm sure if Reddit had its way, we'd have 1984 or the Soviet Union, but woke. I don't really care for the Soviet Union or the world or Oceania in 1984, but at the very least, Joseph Stalin and Big Brother weren't constantly bitching about their pronouns, and that's why I definitely do think you always have to look at Reddit very skeptically. It's very much a website that's controlled by completely ideologically collected outside of a few select subreddits by leftist, woke, Marxist, communist, etc., whatever labels you want to add, and you need to always remember that and call them out on it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have The Effects of Prohibition, posted by RealDraw4713, and that's a cross post they made to the Austrian economic subreddit, which looks like it's since been removed. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position on prohibition is not good. It might be well-intentioned, but prohibition is, if people want to do whatever they want to their own body, that's on them. I personally don't think you should be out on the streets stripping out on drugs all day, but if you want to justify doing that, it's your body, your choice. I personally don't think that's very good, and I personally wouldn't want to live in an area where everyone's just stripping out in the street on drugs all day, but ultimately, if I'm not forced to interact with you, and I can live out in the suburbs far away from you, ultimately, you should be able to do whatever you want to when it comes to drugs or gambling or whatever other vice you have. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have the 60-minute story that the Trump administration doesn't want you to see, posted by CDN history student, and that's a YouTube video from Cory Booker. And then they added the leaked documentary on Trump's deal from an infamous El Salvador prison. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for 60 Minutes. It's very much like a lot of legacy media. It's a DNC propaganda outlet, even though, Reddit, since it says, it's MAGA now since Bari Weiss is in charge. But regardless, 60 Minutes, they don't care about censorship at all. Earlier this year, or I think it might have been last year, but I think it was this year actually. They rode along with German police as they arrested someone for posting a cartoon on the internet that apparently was offensive to Muslims, and they didn't care. They didn't have a single free speech perspective on that. But, suddenly 60 Minutes gets censored, and censorship's the worst thing ever. And it just goes to show you, these people don't have any values other than, Orange Man, everything about him is bad. I'm sure if a Democrat had put Republicans into re-education camps, they wouldn't, 60 Minutes wouldn't be doing a sympathetic profile on them like they're doing for CCOT here. But, it's very much why as I said in the last episode, I think we've moved past the need for stuff like 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes, like all the other corporate media, is going to be ideologically slanted to push an agenda. In this case, it's like very much like Reddit. It's going to be ideologically slanted to push an anti-Trump, pro-Democrat agenda. And I personally don't care for CCOT, but ultimately, the government can send you to whatever prison they want to, and even if it's in a foreign country, and there's nothing you can do about it. But Reddit, of course, they're just using it to push pro-Democrat propaganda. I'm sure if the Democrat, Obama said he was going to close Guantanamo Bay, but he didn't do that. And now that, Trump's pretty much opened a new Guantanamo Bay, that's all they seem to care about. But I'm sure if a Democrat president sends people to CCOT, they'd memory hole it as soon as possible. And it just goes to show you that, it's pretty much all just propaganda all the way down. That's very much what the legacy media like 60 Minutes is, in addition to Reddit, which is pretty much, as I stated in the past, the social media equivalent to legacy media, especially for all the outlets that post, like the NBC News or CNN or the Washington Post, that post directly from their own accounts. And then next we have Jack Smith calls for House Committee to release full videotape of his deposition from thehill.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added, "All I want for Christmas is transparency." And yeah, personally, Reddit didn't care at all about transparency during the Biden years. When they found the cocaine in the White House, they didn't care about exposing how that got in there. But now that the Orange Man's back about, it's all about, we love transparency, and we love this Jack Smith guy because the TV said, like, it's very much like Dr. Fauci or Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine. Whoever the TV says to like. Jack Smith was one of those people who said that the TV promoted as the greatest thing ever. It's just like very much a flavor of the month, as you will. It's like in 2018 it was that Christine Blasey Ford who say, Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulted me, and she was the flavor of the month. Now no one remembers her, and then Jack Smith's kind of in that category now, where he was the flavor of the month last year, when he was prosecuting Trump. But now Reddit's moved on to other flavors of the month, and yeah, personally, if the government wants to keep the full videotape of this deposition secret, ultimately the government can keep whatever it wants secret, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. But Reddit, of course, even if it was released, they still wouldn't be happy. Reddit will always try and just spin everything against Trump, and eventually, and I personally don't care for the guy, but eventually it's tiresome after a while, especially when during the Biden years they always tried to spin everything for Biden, even if he's pretty much the exact same as Trump when it comes to policy, maybe some small differences, but pretty much the exact same in being a figurehead rather than an actual presidential leader. Next we have Trump says fuck the First Amendment, post from CBSNews.com, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's a cross post from the Newsom Massacre subreddit, and that says Trump says broadcast licenses should be terminated if networks almost 100% negative about him. And yeah, personally, I don't really care. I would agree that, a lot of networks are 100% negative about Trump, but, I think Trump really just gives them more influence than they deserve when he constantly brings them up. We need to terminate their broadcast licenses. We need to take off Jimmy Kimmel off the air because he told a lie about the guy who killed Charlie Kirk. And, I think the libertarian business, you just gotta let these networks become irrelevant. Increasingly people are controlling narrative on social media rather than letting the legacy media control the narrative. And I think the libertarian position is, you just gotta let the legacy media become irrelevant rather than constantly bring it up and give it legitimacy like Trump does. I think, they should have freedom of speech to spew whatever lies they want to, but, you just gotta stop giving them attention. It's very much like that scene from the old Trio Safari Simpsons episode. Just don't look. If you stop giving the media attention, then it will eventually die off. And I think that would be very much the libertarian position. We gotta have the corporate media die off. I think it's interesting, right? It's like, I hate the big corporations, but they pretty much only listen to whatever corporate legacy media says. And I think that it just goes to show you how hypocritical they are. They don't have any values other than Orange Man bad. They say, I hate billionaires, but they love the governor of Illinois who's a billionaire because he's a Democrat, and they love the billionaire-run legacy media because they always tell them what they want to hear, especially in regards to the Orange Man. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Ice Goons caught busting into woman's bathroom in new body cam footage from thedailybeast.com, posted by DMBFFF. And yeah, personally, I don't think government agents should be bursting into women's bathrooms or men's bathrooms for that matter. But, ultimately, government agents have the legal monopoly and force to justify whatever they feel like, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have my yearly check-in. How are you all doing? Posted by your state officer. And yeah, it looks like they put a few paragraphs on stuff they used to post here, I think, but they don't post here too much anymore. They left to for other websites because it became too crazy for them, I guess. Or I think it was the API stuff that really did it. Reddit got too overprotective with its API, so they went to like Lemmy, which is like Reddit, but even somehow woker, if you can believe it. But yeah, personally, I'm already running a bit long on this episode, so I'm going to skip over this one. But yeah, I definitely do hope this person's doing well. Apparently, they are communists now, which I personally don't really care for. But if you want to be a communist, be a communist. If you want to be a fascist, be a fascist. If you want to be a Nazi, be a Nazi. Just by doing whatever you feel like, as long as you're not enforcing those anyone else to join in without their consent. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have the corporate crime in the corporate media ignores, posted by Swamp Yankee Dan. But that's a cross post from the Work Reform subreddit, and that's a tweet from the Gravel Institute. Someone stole $950 worth of items from a Walgreens. There were 309 news stories about it. Walgreens was caught stealing $4.5 million from employees. It just got one single story. And yeah, this just goes to show you that, Reddit, oh, here we are critiquing the corporate media, but Reddit usually loves the corporate media wherever they say Orange Man bad. And it just goes to show you, as I said, Reddit has no values other than whoever tells them what they want to hear. That's pretty much a lot of people in the age of social media, to be fair. It's all pretty much all people just being told what they want to hear. And as I stated in the past, it's very much ideological masturbation a lot of the time. But yeah, it just goes to show you that, a lot of people don't have any values when it comes to politics, only teams. In this case, since the corporate media is ignoring the story and for their own benefit, Reddit's calling them out on it, but, the corporate media can just say Orange Man bad 24/7, and Reddit will say Slay Queen, pretty much. And it just gets tiresome after a while, they'll just follow whoever says Orange Man bad. And, personally, I wish more posts on Reddit were like this one. I personally don't really care for, the narrative that Walgreens is stealing money from its employees because, ultimately, if you're an employee for someone, ultimately they can give you whatever they feel like. Maybe they can, screw you a little, but ultimately that's very much the employment system. But a lot of Reddit's simply not like this. It's not at least very trying to be principled like this. It's really just whoever says Orange Man bad the most. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump tosses lifelines to the struggling coal industry and parentheses more subsidized state capitalism for the wealthy from RunMyTimes.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross post from the Energy subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't think the government should be supporting private business. I think private business should be private, and that's very much why, I think, in the early 2010s, the Tea Party was like, big government's all our problem, and the Occupy Wall Street was like, big business is the source of all our problems. In reality, big government, big business are very much joined at the hip, and this is a good example of that. Next we have, this isn't a mistake, it's perjury, posted by Donald Key, and that's crossword from the Newsom Massacre subreddit, and that looks like a tweet from Republicans Against Trump, so Castro lied under oath, that's a crime. And then they quote tweeted Sarah Longwell earlier this year. Kash Patel testified under oath that internal files contained no credible information. Epstein trafficked young women and everyone over themselves. Today, DOJ released internal emails referring to 10 co-conspirators. And yeah, personally, Kash Patel is probably one of the better Trump appointees, but it just goes to show you that the FBI is always going to be inherently corrupt. And that's why you gotta get rid of the FBI. The Republican position is, we can control the agencies like the FBI, but the Libertarians know that they only need to be gotten rid of, and that just goes to show you that conservatives are very much progressives when it comes to driving speed limit. When it comes to alphabet agencies like the FBI, Libertarians know you just gotta get rid of them entirely because they're inherently going to act in their own self-interest, even if you think you're trying to fix everything. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. Yeah, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.